Marketing Officer for First Point USA, and we are delighted to be joined on today's webinar by a very special guest, Kristi Dosh, who is a leading authority and expert on all things NIL, or name, image, and likeness. And this evening webinar is very much about that subject. We've just been chatting, and I think it's 4 years now since NIL became a legal thing in college sports, allowing student athletes to earn on the basis of their name, image, and likeness. And Kristi's here this evening to talk about her own experience in the space, her experience and different things that she's been working on that hopefully you guys can learn from, some advice on how you best position yourselves to make the most of name, imaging, likeness. I know we've got a mix of guests in the audience, some First Point athletes, some prospective athletes, some student athletes who are currently on their course studying for their degree and playing their sport just now. So delighted to welcome you all this evening. Delighted to welcome Kristi, and it's great to be here and learn from your expertise on name, image, and likeness. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session this evening. I know we've got a few people who had registered and can't attend, so we'll share the recording with you in the next day or so. We've got a series of questions that we've put together for Kristi that we'll run through over the next kind of 45 minutes or so. But for those of you who are keen to ask a question, please do so in the chat box. We'll keep most of them till the end, but some may relate to some of the questions that we're going to ask Kristi this evening. So Kristi, welcome this evening. I really appreciate you giving up your time to join us and have a chat to us on all things NIL. We know a little bit about you. You've obviously been heavily involved in the NIL space since 2001 or so. So be keen just to get a feel for your own experience over the last 4 years, how you got into NIL and how your expertise has developed over the past 4 years. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I started my career as a corporate attorney and was just always a big sports fan. And I was writing on the side about business and legal issues in sports completely for fun. I really didn't think that it was going to become part of my career. It was my hobby on the side. And I ended up getting a job offer after a couple of years of blogging to go to ESPN and be their sports business reporter. And one of the first things I reported on there, and that would have been 2010, 2011, was the Ed O'Bannon trial, which dealt with the use of his name, image, and likeness in the EA Sports college basketball video games. So when people ask me when I started covering NIL, I always say, like, from the very beginning. It just, back then, the rules didn't change in order to allow it. And so we've seen little cases pop up here and there since then. But I knew that when California passed their state law, I think that was end of 2019, and then several other states, Colorado, Florida, and some others quickly followed suit, that name, image, and likeness was coming. And I was really interested in sort of the subject matter and was able to apply some of my legal expertise to it. So I really started writing about NIL in 2020, even before it started, as we talked about what it was going to look like and how schools were going to handle it. And I thought that I would write about it, for like 6 months after 2021, July of 2021 happened. And then, things would kind of normalize and there wouldn't be that many stories anymore. And I would like move on with my life and write about other things. But here we are 4 years later, and I have not moved on to other things. And I still only write and speak on NIL. And I teach undergraduate and graduate classes on NIL at the University of Florida, in addition to continuing to write on it. And it is my sole focus and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. So excited to be here and help people understand it better.
So if we're going to have a guest speaker, I think you're the perfect representative to have with us. So yeah, hopefully, and I'm sure everybody will learn a lot from you tonight as we go through some of these questions. So I guess for those who are kind of starting out on their student athlete journey and getting ready to start university or college in the States, what would be the first steps you would recommend in someone sort of preparing themselves, readying themselves to potentially look at the NIL market as and when they start?
Yeah, the first thing I talk to student athletes about when they come to me and they're like, I want to do something with my NIL, but I don't know what to do. I ask them about what they're currently doing, because everyone sees social media marketing as kind of the low hanging fruit. That's the deals you hear about the most. And student athletes tend to think that that's the only way they can monetize their NIL. And it's simply not true. There are so many ways to take advantage of this. And I have covered, I think, just about every way you can make money on your NIL, from creating your own board game, which a gymnastics athlete at the University of Florida created the first ever gymnastics board game. You've got athletes who are writing books and making money on it, athletes who are monetizing their music. They are getting paid to be public speakers. They're teaching lessons and camps and clinics. I made a lot of money when I was in college teaching pitching lessons. I was a softball athlete growing up, but I did not play in college. And so I was allowed to make money teaching these pitching lessons. And this would have been like 25 years ago. I made pretty good money back then. Parents pay even more for that now. You guys probably know, parents of youth athletes will pay quite a bit for training and lessons for their kids. And so I know athletes in pretty much every single sport who are making money doing that. So when I sit down with athletes, I talk to them about what they already enjoy doing. I talk to them about what they might want to do after graduation, because I think there's some NIL activities you can engage in that might set you up for that future after sport. So I think it looks different for each athlete, and you need to lean into things you're already doing, not try to create, a social media platform from zilch just because you see that's what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely. And we'll touch upon social media in the next question. I know you said it's the low-hanging fruit. It's probably the highest profile element of NIL that people maybe read about. So with that in mind, if someone was to focus on social media, what would be the kind of practical things you would recommend, again, to get someone in a position to increase their brand visibility, develop a bit of their personal brands through their social media channels?
So there's some really simple things that start with having a username that makes you easy to find. If you have a really common name, maybe you've got to add, the number you use in your sport to the end of your name. I do not have a common name, so I get to use Kristi Dosh all over the place, and nobody else has that name. But you want to make it easy for people to find you, because if there is a brand who hears about you and they want to work with you and they want to check you out on social media, you don't want them to have to dig around to find you. And to that end, you also want to have a pretty clear picture of what you look like, so that when they do find your profile, they see the name, they see the picture, they read the bio, which hopefully has some really basic information like your school and your sport, and they go, okay, I found the right person, particularly if you do have a more common name. So I think there's super simple things like that you can do with your profile. And then my sort of go-to that I do with student athletes, and we do this exercise actually in my NIL classes, is I tell student athletes to think of 3 things that they want to be known for, or that they really enjoy. So their sport is usually one of those things, but I want them to come up with 2 other things. Maybe they enjoy going fishing or hunting, or they enjoy fashion or music. Come up with 3 things that you sort of want to be part of your brand, and then really build the things you're posting around those 3 things. Because I think the biggest mistake athletes make is all their content is about their sport. And you really want to show people more of your life and more of your hobbies and your lifestyle. And that's going to serve you after you're done with your sport. A quick sort of example, I had Florida's starting quarterback in my NIL class last fall while he was playing his final season of college football. And we had just done a lesson where we talked about this, and about this need to have these, I call them the 3 buckets, and to represent these other things outside of football. He got injured the very next weekend, and he was an athlete who was primarily featuring football on his social media. And that was actually the end of his football career. He's not going to play in the NFL. His football days are done now. And now he's got to figure out, well, how do I keep these deals I had in college that were based on football? How do I keep those going now that football isn't going to be part of my life anymore? And a lot of athletes face that. And so I think it's really important, as early on as you can, to have those other sort of buckets, I call them, where you're posting content, because not only does that allow you to go beyond your years playing your sport, it also gives you really easy tie-ins with brands. So if you're constantly featuring fishing, for example, you're going to get brands in that space who are going to want to work with you because you're going to build this audience around that content. And that's going to be really valuable to brands that you're in a niche. And so I think it's really important to sort of hone in on a few things and make sure you're distributing your content across those things.
That's great advice, Kristi. Thanks for that. And I guess that important to look beyond your 4 years at university as well, to try and keep some of those deals and engagement going as well. Just moving away from the kind of individual elements then to NIL collectives, and it's something we've written about here at First Point USA, but something that might not be all that familiar with people in the audience. So if you can just maybe explain to the audience what an NIL collective is and how they are playing a seemingly increasing role in facilitating deals and endorsements across different universities.
Yeah, collectives are third-party companies that popped up outside of college athletic departments, so they are not part of the athletic department. Until, I will say, things are shifting a little bit with revenue sharing potentially coming this fall, but up until now, they have been separate from the athletic department. But it's generally a group of boosters who have joined together to try and fundraise and raise money so that they can do NIL deals directly with college athletes. Generally, those contracts look like a set sum of money for a season or for a school year, and you might have a laundry list of things you have to do for that money. So maybe they're going to give you $40,000 over the season, and during the course of the season, or maybe the course of the school year, you have to make 2 personal appearances, and you have to sign 100 autograph photos, and you've got to show up for a Zoom Q&A. There will be this sort of laundry list of things you need to do, and that money is usually paid in installments so that they can make sure you are doing the things you are supposed to do. And that has quickly become a way to entice recruits to come to universities. It is not supposed to be that way. Inducements are not supposed to be allowed. And without going too much into it, there was a big legal case with the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia because the NCAA was trying to block these boosters and collectives from talking to recruits. And the NCAA ultimately had to settle that case and change its rules. So boosters are now allowed to talk to recruits about this money. And it has really changed, particularly the way that we see recruiting in football and basketball, and to some degree in other sports, kind of depending on the school and the programs that are strong at that school. But those NIL collectives are essentially third-party fundraising arms that try to funnel as much money as possible to the college athletes at their school.
And who then within the collective would be responsible for ensuring those athletes kind of deliver against those requirements? Would it be the coach's responsibility, or would it be someone from the collective to say, hey, here's what we need you to do, this semester, here's that bucket list, if you like, or laundry list?
Generally, the coach's only involvement, and really they're not supposed to be involved at all, but really their involvement generally looks like telling the collective, hey, we really want this recruit. We think we need this much money to get him, or we want to grab this guy in the transfer portal. We think we need this much to get this player. So they're having some of those money conversations between the coach and the collective. But the coach would not, in most cases, be the one making sure these things are being done. Every collective looks a little bit different. Some are essentially run by one person and some volunteers. Some are much more complex and have a 5 or 6 or 7 person full-time staff. Some work with outside companies that have created software that kind of tracks this stuff and helps them manage their athlete roster. So it's going to depend from one collective to the next. And I would say that some are watching athletes more closely and ensuring that they are doing all those things in the contract. And some are not, because there have been a lot of claims by collectives as athletes have transferred that, hey, he didn't really complete all the stuff he was supposed to do in his contract to begin with. And we're even starting to see collectives who want to try and be repaid some of the money that they have paid out to these athletes who haven't fulfilled their obligation. So it looks a little different from one school to the next.
And then speaking of some of the brands that are involved in NIL industry, I think it's worth 1.7 billion or something now. That there's obviously a lot of investment going in from marketing teams, from sponsorship teams into this. What What are the kind of brands or biggest sectors within industry that are getting involved in NIL just now? And have you seen a kind of shift from when it first started out to who's getting involved now?
There's definitely a lot of athletic related brands that produce, equipment or apparel that are, really obvious tie-ins with athletes. I think we're always going to see those kinds of brands involved. But we've really seen it expand. In the first year, I would say you did not see a lot of big national or multinational companies coming in. The NIL rules were all over the place. And I think their legal departments were probably like, no, we're not getting involved in this because you've got school rules and state laws, and then you got the NCAA regulations. So you actually saw most major brands stay out the majority of that first year. However, as the rules have sort of solidified more, we've seen a lot of those brands move into the space. So, I would say anyone who typically works with influencers in any industry, whether that's fashion or music, or it is something in the athletic space, if they're already using influencers outside of college sports, they have at this point moved into college sports. And the reports and the studies consistently show that athletes actually create higher engagement and better conversion for brands than other types of influencers do. And so I think every year we've seen more brands come into this space, and that will only continue to grow.
Yeah, we've kind of again looked at that, and there's certainly been a number of new brands as well as those that kind of right in from the start who've been getting involved in some of these deals. You mentioned at the start you're obviously working with the University of Florida. I think you talked about creating a new certificate or qualification. So you're obviously lecturing in NIL. What else are universities or colleges doing to support their athletes? And would that be kind of typical what you're doing, or does it really vary from institution to institution?
I would say that varies a lot too. I mean, we've seen a fair number of NIL classes pop up. I at one point was keeping a spreadsheet of every school I knew of that was offering any sort of NIL class. And I would say at large universities that have major college football and basketball programs, there was usually at least some sort of NIL class, and not limited to athletes, but open to all students. So I teach an NIL class in the public relations program at UF. I teach one in sport management. Then I teach a graduate level in sport management. And I do get athletes in my class, but I also get a lot of non-athletes who are college, sports fans, or they were high school athletes and now they want to work in sports, so they want to understand NIL as they go into these sports related jobs. So it's kind of an interesting cross section of students who are interested in it. And we continue to add classes at Florida. There's actually another professor, and he is, his experience is more in visual branding. So he has a class and they work on logos for actual college athletes and help them build out their logos and teach them about trademarking their logos and creating merchandise. And that's a little different from my class, where I focus a little more on sort of the rules and kind of how the industry is changing. And I would say at major universities, you see a fair amount of that. But then at schools who are kind of, I would say, financially like the next rung below, that are maybe FCS football, or even the group of 5 football teams within FBS, some of the mid-major basketball schools, they are bootstrapping a little more, and they might not have a dedicated NIL class, but some of them have put together curriculums that cross several departments at the university, where they're suggesting athletes take, this class from the business department and this class from the marketing department to learn some skills that translate to NIL, even though they're not able to offer an NIL specific class. And then you do have some schools where the athletic department is able to offer its own courses. At UF, they actually can't do that. Athletics can't offer a 4-credit course, but I think at BYU, they do have a 4-credit course out of athletics. So it really differs from one school to the next.
So if someone is going to college, for example, this year, is that something they could potentially expect to get advice on once they're there? So someone in situ, I know we spoke to Penn State recently, and I think they have a kind of NIL advisor within their athletic department. Is that a role that you're seeing increasingly kind of frequently?
Yeah, I would say at the Division 1 level for sure, you're seeing NIL directors or coordinators. As you get into schools that aren't playing at the highest level of college football, you might not see one dedicated person on the staff who only does NIL, but you're going to have knowledgeable people that are in compliance and in marketing who are serving to help student athletes with NIL and can help direct them to classes to take or resources to take advantage of. A lot of athletic departments have partnered with outside third parties like Open Doors and Influencer and some other companies in the space to offer online education or app-based education for athletes. So I do think that over the last 4 years since NIL started, we are seeing more and more education made available. One of my sort of complaints about the system is you don't get it till you get to college. And so you have high school and younger athletes, many of whom live in places where they can do NIL now at their current stage. There are still some states here in the US that don't allow NIL at the high school level, but the vast majority do now. But there's no education at the high school level, and there's no education with parents. And so not only do they not know how to get started, but they're also signing really bad contracts. And it breaks my little lawyer heart when they come to me, because they usually don't come to me till there's a problem. They've already signed the contract. Now something has gone wrong, or there was no contract and now they're not getting paid. And so I really hope that the education starts to trickle down from the college level so people are educated before they get on campus.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. We'll touch upon that in a few questions' time. So just speaking from our own perspective, from First Point, I guess our two biggest sports are soccer and increasingly rugby as well. And I guess relatively speaking, they are small sports in the US marketplace relative to football and basketball. So for someone, say, from a kind of lower profile sport such as soccer and rugby, what advice would you give them to sort of push themselves into the marketplace and again trying to increase their visibility and appeal to potentially brands or potentially collectives out there?
Yeah, I think it just depends on what you want to do with your NIL. If you're looking for brand deals and for social media, it's all about building up your personal channel. It doesn't really matter where you go to school or what sport you play. It's more about building up your following. And it doesn't have to be, 50,000 followers. One of the athletes, I've got an NIL book coming out this summer, and I profiled all these athletes. And I tried to pull athletes from all three divisions in the NCAA, also from NAIA, and in a variety of sports. And there's one athlete I profiled there. She actually goes to my alma mater, which is a Division 3 school. She's a female volleyball player. And she was the first college athlete that I know of to sign a deal with Lululemon. And she had 1,500 followers when she signed with them. So it doesn't require an enormous following, but she had this very unique live series she created on Instagram that was growing and that really fit what Lululemon was looking for. She reached out to them, sort of made the pitch to them about being the presenting sponsor of this live series. She'd already been doing it and sent some examples of it. To take advantage of it as an athlete, if you don't have that enormous following and you don't have an agent who's out there looking at stuff for you, you've got to be willing to reach out to brands yourself. And I've seen athletes be really successful with that when they're reaching out to brands that they already use, that they already have loyalty to, that they're already featuring on their social media. And so I really think it's something that anybody can do if they're willing to invest the time into it.
That's great example, and hopefully that's something that others on the audience can relate to. Given, as you say, that individual that didn't have a huge following, but that kind of creativity element to her and a kind of unique sort of element to her personality on her channel, which is great.
If you don't mind, I'll tell one other story I think is good, especially since you're based in Scotland, because this involves Scotland. So there's a Division 3 golfer, and he did a panel with me at NCAA convention last year, and I ended up using his story in the book too. And he worked through what are called NIL marketplaces. So these are platforms online where you go and you can connect your social media channels, and it will allow brands to find you. They also post opportunities that you can apply for. And he had been invited to play in a tournament at St. Andrews. And, as a golfer, like that, that was his dream, was to play at St. Andrews. And this was an important, tournament for him to go play in as well, but he couldn't afford to go. He did not have the money to travel there. And he was able to talk to the folks that ran the platform, tell them about it. And they were able to help him pull together, I think it was like 5 different brands that ended up helping fund his travel to St. Andrews to play in this tournament. And now he's a professional golfer, and he talks about, building relationships with brands while he was in college has allowed him to continue some of those relationships into his pro career, but also just taught him how to pitch himself and how to get sponsors so that he could support himself as a professional golfer. And I just think it's such a fun story because there's so much focus on like making cold hard cash, but like he pieced these people together, and it was cash and product and all these people pulling together to like fund just the travel piece or to make trades. It was really interesting how the deal came together. And I just think that's such a good story of how NIL can help you even meet your goals with your sport.
Absolutely. A great story. And I guess for those individuals involved in a sport such as golf or tennis, where you're kind of left to your own devices once you do turn professional, then it's a good learning curve from when you go to try and find sponsors at the next step of your career. So that's again another great example. And some of the questions that are coming through touch upon international students and whether they can or cannot benefit commercially from NIL deals. I know we touched upon this, Kristi, in a previous conversation, I think a couple of years ago. So we know this is a complex area, but certainly one that people are keen to hear about the details on. So if you could give us an update on what international students are able or are permitted to do that obviously doesn't go against any kind of visa or tax regulations in the States.
Yeah, so I would say compared to 4 years ago when this all started, international athletes are getting to do more and are getting better education about what they can and can't do. So when they're home, or technically when they're just outside of the US, as long as they're in a country that the visa they're on allows it, they can do as many deals as they want. I know one a fencer actually was in a group that I helped coach through Meta, and she was from Hong Kong, and she just lined up a whole bunch of deals that when she went home for Christmas break, she did all those deals while she was home. She shot the video and the photos and did the posting of the content and all of that while she was home for Christmas. So you can certainly kind of stack up things for while you're home. While you're in the United States, you can participate in what are considered passive income opportunities. The easiest ones to get involved with are going to be through the university, through their group licensing program. Almost every school now has some sort of group licensing program. If they don't, for some reason, you can actually go directly to these group licensing companies. The 2 biggest ones are called the Brandar Group and One Team Partners, and they generally are the 2 that partner with most of the schools, but they're the ones putting together deals for jerseys and jerseys and trading cards and bobbleheads and you name it, especially team-wide sort of stuff. So I know quite a few international athletes who are able to earn money having their jersey sold, being part of a trading card pack for their team. But here's the caveat with it, okay? They can participate, they can license their name, image, and likeness to be used for the jersey or the trading cards, but they can't promote it when they're in the United States. So they can't go on their social media and say, hey, look at my jersey, go buy it, in the campus store. They can make money off the jersey being sold, but they can't talk about it while they're in the United States. They can't promote it in any way. And that's why it's considered a passive income opportunity. So a lot of athletes have been able to take advantage of those group licensing programs. And then for athletes who are at a level where they're either working with the collective or they're working with an agent, that allows you some additional opportunities. We've had collectives that have flown international athletes out of the country to go somewhere else to do deals. They stack up a bunch of deals for them, take them off to the Bahamas, or I know one group, they went up to Canada and they did deals out of the country. And then the collective took care of everything once they were back in the United States. There's a great example of a basketball player too, who was playing a tournament in the Bahamas, and his agent stacked up a bunch of deals while he was there. They also shot a bunch of still photos and took a lot of video that were generic of him playing basketball, holding a basketball, whatever, that then his agent could later sell to brands. And that's okay too, because he took the photos while he was out of the country. Once they're back in the country, the agent is selling those to brands, and the athlete isn't doing any more once they're in the country. So that's another example of sort of a way around these rules. They just can't actively perform anything while they're in the United States.
Okay, that's great. And hopefully that has given some clarification to a few people that are asking questions. I know it can be quite complicated. And is there anywhere you can go online to find that the specific detail of what you've just said? Obviously, we can use this and share this, but if someone's wanting to sort of have that backed up in any way, is that written down in black and white now?
Yeah. So I hoard URLs, and I bought NIL for internationalathletes.com at the very beginning of NIL. And then I finally sort of built out a microsite with it. I am not an immigration attorney, but I have worked really closely with two immigration attorneys, Ksenia Mayarova and Amy Maldonado. And if you go to NIL for internationalathletes.com, I've got a webinar I did with them, and we go into a bunch of examples of what you can and can't do, including the ones I just talked about, but there's a lot more. It was a whole hour long, so you can imagine like how much complexity there is here. And there's also some frequently asked questions on there. There's an article where we broke down a bunch of scenarios. Like, for example, at the beginning of NIL, there were a lot of international athletes who thought that as long as they donated the money they made to charity, that was okay. And it turns out it's not, because it's not about where you make the money or whether you're paid in US dollars or not. It is about where you are when you do the work, and not work like a 9-to-5 or a W-2 like we think about here in the US, but like the active part of the deal. And so if you are getting paid to put up an Instagram post and then you're donating that to charity, if you're here in the US, when you create the Instagram post, that doesn't work. So we went through a bunch of those scenarios, and they're on the website. And then I also have about half of a chapter in my book that's coming out this summer that covers international athletes as well.
Great. And someone just asked, actually, so if it was game footage, for example, would that not be allowed to be used in any kind of deal or sponsored social media content, for example?
The harder part with that is actually getting the permission from the university. If the university gave permission for that, because you've got their logos on you, you've got a lot of licensing and trademark issues when you're actually in a game. And then, depending on who actually shot it, if you were able to get a photo or a video from the athletic department and you had permission to use it, and someone other than you is facilitating a deal with a brand, an agent, somebody from the collective, I do think there's a way to safely do that. I think you would probably want to work with an immigration attorney and make sure you're, dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. But actually, I think the bigger hurdle there would be the university, because they have still been very limited in allowing athletes to appear in uniform in any kind of NIL deal. It is allowed some, but there are a lot of parameters around it. And usually the brand is having to pay the university for the university licensing appearing in the photo or video. So it gets very complicated for those reasons. Yeah.
That's great. And we'll share those links you just mentioned in our follow-up newsletter to everybody who's registered tonight. And you touched upon some kind of bad deals you've seen. And so what might be some of the pitfalls that an athlete should look out for when it comes to, say, negotiating a deal or again, just kind of putting themselves in the position to be visible in terms of trying to get NIL deals or endorsements?
So I would say that some of the worst deals, the biggest problem is that they're not in writing. They are, they were verbal during your campus visit or on a call with a coach, or it was over text, or it was in an email. And in some states that's admissible, and in some states it's not. But if there's no written contract, I can't tell you the number of athletes and parents I've talked to who chose a school thinking that one thing was going to happen when they got there, and instead something else happened. And anybody who follows college football over here knows that Matt Sluka, UNLV's would-be quarterback, ended up never playing a game last season because he says he was promised one thing and got to campus, and it was a totally different situation, and there wasn't a contract there, so he chose to sit out and to transfer. I mean, that has happened not just to high-profile football athletes, but to a number of athletes who went somewhere based on a verbal promise. So 100% you want it in a contract, but then in the contract, there's a whole new, set of problems. So I always tell people to look out for 3 words. Okay. And these are not the only problems in contracts, but this will take care of a lot of them. Look for exclusive or exclusivity, some form of the word exclusive, perpetuity, and irrevocable. So the problem with exclusivity is that you are locking yourself into some category where you aren't going to be allowed to work with other people. And this can take a lot of different iterations. With a brand, it might be that you are working exclusively with this one beauty brand for the next year. And so now you're gonna have to turn down all the other beauty brands that come to you for the next year. That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but if somebody's asking you to be exclusive and to turn down other opportunities, particularly for a longer period of time, they should be paying you a lot extra. There should be a premium on that because you are agreeing to turn away these other deals. That's sort of how it comes up in brand deals. In collective contracts, and now even in revenue sharing contracts that have started going out, it comes up in terms of working exclusively with the collective, meaning that the collective is going to control all of your NIL and they are going to work on brokering brand deals for you, and you're not able to get deals on the outside, or if you do, they still get a commission for it. That doesn't happen as much with collectives as it did in the beginning, but you still want to watch out for that exclusive language. And now it's going to start popping up in revenue sharing contracts. And I won't get into the nitty gritty of revenue sharing, but one thing that is happening if the House settlement is approved in the next few weeks is that schools can act as marketing agents for athletes, and they can do so exclusively. So again, the school could tie you to having them represent you, having them source all your brand deals. I would never advise that you sign with a collective or a school if you have to be exclusive with them. You should be open to working with other partners. So I would say exclusivity is bad in those cases. And then perpetuity just means forever. What we see there the most is it happens in all three kinds of contracts: brands, collectives, and schools. You are allowing them, in most cases, the way they're using it, to use your NIL forever. So one example I've seen already is an NFL player, a now NFL player, who in college signed with a collective, gave the collective the ability to use his name, image, and likeness in perpetuity. Now he's in the NFL. He's got a fair amount of fame. He's worth a lot more than he was when he signed that collective contract 3 or 4 years ago. And the collective is still off marketing his stuff with his name on it, and he's not getting any additional money because the contract didn't allow for that. So that's one of the problems with perpetuity. And then the irrevocable language, that just means you can't take it back. So particularly with a brand, I don't like that language, because what if the brand gets in hot water 6 months from now and you don't want to be associated with them anymore? You want the ability to get away from them, to have them stop using your NIL so that you're not tied long-term to somebody who doesn't fit your image anymore, or who perhaps has done something that you don't support.
Yeah, so it works both ways. And someone just asked, can a coach leverage NIL opportunities? I know you said coaches tend not to get involved, but I guess the question is can coaches kind of tap into the market, or would a coach ever get involved in kind of helping their athletes get NIL deals?
I mean, I would say behind the scenes, coaches have been helping already connect athletes with brands. Some of the state laws don't allow that. In the beginning, the NCAA rules didn't really allow that. It's a fuzzy area that definitely is not made public, but I would say that there are definitely some coaches who are more there's other coaches that don't understand this space at all, that they're still trying to figure it out. So they're not helping their athletes because they haven't really figured out how it works. What I think is going to change as we move into revenue sharing is that now, my understanding of the rules and the way I would interpret it is a coach could do an NIL deal with an athlete. Like we saw some of that already with Deion Sanders at University of Colorado, because he had kids on the team who are his sons. And so they did some family NIL deals, and that was allowed because they're related to each other. Up until now, there have been some state laws and even some interpretations of NCAA rules that schools couldn't help broker deals, or that you couldn't get direct payment from the school or from a coach. And so I think coaches have not done things with athletes, but I do think going forward, you're going to see more where coaches and athletes might appear in the same ad, or otherwise marketing the same product or brand.
Oh, that's good to know. And again, at the start of the webinar, you touched upon activities out with the kind of social media side or brand endorsements. What what else is available for someone? I know you've referenced a few different things, but coaching, for example, is that something that's a relatively easy thing for a student athlete to get involved with?
Yeah, I was really surprised when I started talking to athletes for my book and I was trying to figure out, like, were there some sports where doing lessons and camps and clinics were more popular than others? And I would say that is the one that really was across every sport, where I was able to find athletes who were making money either hosting clinics with maybe a former coach they had, like a high school or a youth coach, or hosting back at a gym where they used to work out. Or I worked at batting cages when I was in high school because I was a softball player. So like I could see going and I did camps and clinics with them as an employee, but as an athlete, I could see in college being able to go back and do something with a group like that. So we've seen a lot of that. And then lessons, the one-way lessons have really changed since I did it. When I was in college 25 years ago, is that I had to like go in person and teach these pitching lessons. And I was limited to sort of the area around my college, which was enough for me. But now there's all these online platforms where you can actually give feedback to athletes online, and it's not even necessarily live. They may record a video and send it to you, and then you send notes back and say, like for me, one of the biggest problems with softball pitchers is they let their arm get too far away from their body. Well, I can see that on video and I can tell you, look, your arm drifts every time you come through your windup. So you can now do that kind of stuff online on a schedule that fits, your school and sports schedule. And also platforms that allow you to record, certain skills or tricks where you can teach people how to do them. And then you can sell those short little videos to people who want to learn those skills. And I was really surprised. Like, I wouldn't have thought track was something where you would see a lot of lessons. Like, I just thought, look, I'm not a runner, so I don't know, but that's not one of those sports where I thought a lot of people would be teaching lessons. And I actually found quite a few, including one that I profiled in the book, who she wants to be a coach after college. And she has used this as an opportunity, not only to make money, but to build her resume by coaching these youth track athletes, and teaching them to run better and faster.
That's great. And I guess you're going to be good at whatever sport you're specializing in, so that again could be some low-hanging fruit for you to get involved with. So good to know. And obviously Kristi is available for softball lessons if anybody is in that particular sport.
Kristi is too old for that now.
I'm sure not. So again, a couple of questions that have come in that we'll touch upon. So when it comes to managing your NIL activities, what advice would you give in terms of using some of these platforms? We've talked about open doors in the past, or getting involved with an agent. Obviously, it's going to be different for everybody, but what generally would your advice be?
I would say that athletes who want to go down that social media path, I do think I would get myself on several of these. They're called marketplaces. I will tell you the ones I put in my book, and I will say them here now. You don't have to buy the book. I'll tell you what they are. But I vetted them by how many athletes told me they had actually gotten deals on those platforms, because there are a lot of platforms out there, but I get a lot of complaints from athletes that they signed up and they've never gotten anything on that platform. So the ones that consistently were told to me by athletes were Post Game, Playbooked. And now the third one just flew. I know there's three that I have said over and over and over. Now I feel bad because I've forgotten the third one. It'll come back to me. Icon Source. See, I knew I would get it. Those are three that I've heard over and over that athletes have consistently gotten deals. Open Doors is obviously a big one in the space as well. I know those guys, they do a great job. That was one that schools partnered with early on. And so I would say that maybe one of the reasons I didn't hear that from as many athletes is there are a lot of athletes on Open Doors, because as schools signed up with them, they signed all their athletes up onto the platform. Whereas Post Game and Icon Source and Playbooked that I mentioned, individual athletes had to go to them and say, I want to create a profile. And so I don't think there are as many athletes on that platform. So maybe you have a little less competition, but it's super easy to sign up. Most of them will connect with, say your Instagram account or one of your social platforms, and it will actually like pull in your image and your bio. It takes under 5 minutes to sign up for each one of these. So I think that's a really good place to start. And then if you're an athlete already playing in college, I would also encourage you to sign up for companies like Campus Inc. They do t-shirts, and it's super easy to work with them. Again, it takes less than 5 minutes to sign up. They will help you design and create your own merchandise. They do some really cool stuff. I have done a lot of stories with those guys over the years. They gave me updated numbers when I put the book out, and I think they were up getting close to $2 million they've paid out to college athletes. So you see a lot of merchandise that's being done over there, and they do a great job. So I would recommend them as well.
So that probably answers someone's question about is it possible to get deals without an agent, and obviously using some of these platforms, you certainly can.
And I would say like 80% of the athletes I profiled in my book don't have an agent. They were out there pitching it themselves. And so I did a whole chapter on how do you pitch yourself? Like, how do you find the right person to reach out to? How do you figure out what their email address is? And then what do you say in the actual email? And I was very grateful. I had my own idea of what the email should look like, but I asked the athletes I was profiling in the book, would you give me one of your pitches to print in the book? And several of them, including the D3 athlete that got the Lululemon deal, gave me their actual pitches that landed deals. She gave the Lululemon email. So I think it's neat to see they all have a little bit different style. It doesn't look exactly like the example I gave. So you can kind of see the different ways you could present yourself, and you can just send this stuff over DM. You can send it by email. I just tell athletes, make a list of say 10 brands that you already love. Places, maybe you eat at Chipotle, twice a week, or, you love a certain flavor of, some kind of energy drink or something, or you have some brand of socks you love. I mean, it can be anything. And I tell them, put down 10 brands that you already spend money with. And those are the first brands I would go to, because you can truthfully tell them what a big fan you are. And I encourage athletes to go ahead and put up like a post, or maybe do a couple of stories where you feature the brand and you tag them, then reach out to them, because then you're showing them, look, I already love your brand so much, I'm talking about it for free. And people think like, well, if they're getting it for free, why would they pay you? That is not their mentality at all. Like, they are excited to work with someone who already loves the brand and already understands the value proposition. And I've seen that be really successful, but you've got to have an athlete who is comfortable doing that. And I know a lot of athletes, it's scary and you're going to get no's, and that's just part of it. But if you're willing to do it, every athlete I know who has proactively reached out to brands has landed multiple deals, every single one.
I mean, would your advice be to reach out directly to those brands? I guess you could do that through your social media channel, through Instagram, or do it through the marketplace, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, you can do either. I like Instagram because you can feature them in a story. And if you tag them in the story, it goes into their DMs. So then when you DM them, they're going to see in their history, even if they don't normally read their DMs, for story mentions like that, when you message them on there, they're going to see that earlier up in the stream of the DM. And I just think that's really powerful that they can see right then and there that you've mentioned them before. So I sort of love that as a strategy. But on those platforms, in addition to brands being able to kind of search keywords to try and find, like I said, if you like fishing and you've got fishing in your bio, and there's a company that does rods and reels, and they're looking for an athlete to work with, and they type fishing in on the platform, hopefully you come up then in the results. So you get some of that, but also brands will post deals and you can apply to them. And the applications are usually really short and easy. And a lot of athletes have been able to get deals by going on the platform and filling out those applications.
That's again good advice. Thanks for going into detail about that one. So for any athlete who's currently in discussions with potential colleges out there, they may be speaking to coaches and kind of getting towards the end of their journey on deciding where they're going, are there any questions you would recommend asking them that would maybe would NIL have an impact on making that decision? Obviously at the very high end, the kind of elite athletes out there, it certainly is, but for your average kind of athlete, maybe in some of those lower profile sports, is that something that should be involved in your discussions?
Yeah, I would ask about the type of education that they provide. Do they bring in speakers? Are there networking opportunities with their boosters? I think stuff like that's really valuable too. Like beyond a cash money NIL deal, the opportunity to network with boosters, I would say, has increased with NIL as sort of another way to add value to student athletes. So you're seeing more and more of that at schools. So I would just ask, what their NIL education and programming looks like. Do they have any courses that are for credit at the school that you can take? And just like, what is their philosophy on NIL? Because I think you'll have some schools that are still a little combative about it. And that's good to know, like, because if NIL is important to you, not because it's important to you, like how much money you can make, but if NIL is important to you because you want to grow a personal brand and you have this long-term vision of what you're going to do with your sport or what you're going to do after graduation, I think it's important to know if it's a school that like just is providing nothing for NIL, because there are still ones like that out there, especially as you get into Division II and Division III. There are huge differences at that level between schools that have really invested in NIL and are trying to create opportunities and those that haven't. So I would for sure ask about those things. And then I would ask, what have players on your team been doing with their NIL over the last few years? Because that might also just give you ideas that you were like, oh, I never thought about, doing that. And then, hopefully that athlete is still there, or you could get an introduction to them and you can figure out how you can do that thing too.
Great. That's again, great advice. Thanks for that. And that answers a couple of other questions that were coming through. So you've obviously worked with a few different athletes yourself. You've certainly studied the marketplace as much as anyone. Would there be any athletes in particular that you would recommend to our audience to follow as examples of good practice?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. So the first one that comes to mind for me is Anna Camden. She just graduated from Richmond University. She was a women's basketball player who started out at Penn State and then transferred to Richmond. She engaged in NIL from day one. She's actually one of the very first athletes that I met, and just does a really great job of being herself and creating opportunities just from showcasing the things she's doing that she already loves. So when I talked about the 3 buckets earlier, I've never asked her before like what her 3 buckets would be, but I can tell you what they are because I watch her content. And it would be basketball, and then her faith. She talks a lot about her faith and what she believes in and why she believes it and how it's important in her life. And then makeup. She's constantly doing makeup while she's talking to you. And I feel like I get great makeup tips. I wish I was as good at it as she is, because I watch her and I'm like, she makes that look so easy. And then I do it and it's a mess, but she's 20 years younger. So her skin's a little different than mine is. But she really leans into those 3 buckets. And I remember at the beginning of NIL, she was like, I would just love a deal with Drunken Elephant, which is a makeup brand for those who don't know. Great name, Drunken Elephant. And I was like, well, have you reached out to them? No, and then I don't know if she DM'd or emailed them. I think she DM'd them, and they didn't do a cash deal with her, but they sent her this gigantic box. And this is not a cheap makeup brand or skincare brand. They sent her this giant box of product to try, and then the more she did the makeup and the beauty and the skincare routine in her reels while she was talking about other stuff, the more brands wanted to send her stuff. And then brands wanted to start paying her to feature their products. So I think she's a really good example of somebody who doesn't only focus on her sport, that really does have these other interests and who just gives you a lot of behind the scenes content. And I think that's what grows your audience the fastest and makes them engage the most, is when they feel like they're getting to go behind the scenes and really get to know you as a person, and they become this like online friend of yours. So she's done a great job with that. And then another good one would be Alex Glover. She also recently graduated. A lot of the people that I'm going to think of who are doing a good job, they've just had some more runway to do it because they've been doing it for a few years now. Alex knew she wanted to go into broadcasting after graduation. And so she started doing commentary in her Instagram reels and her TikToks on sports to sort of build these clips up for herself, because she wasn't getting to intern at, a TV station because she was busy with her sport, but she was able to sort of build up this portfolio. And when she graduated, she did start getting all these freelance gigs working for ESPN. And I think she might have done Big Ten Network. She had several different networks that she was doing some sidelines and some reporting for, and continues to this day to grow that. And she's an athlete who talks in the book about how During college, she focused a lot of her content on volleyball because she was a women's volleyball player, but that as she got closer to graduation, she started featuring more lifestyle content, and then more of the broadcasting kind of stuff, and what an easy transition it was. And I talked to a lot of athletes who, as soon as they graduate, the NIL deals stop. That's sort of the end of their NIL journey. They get their big, boy, big girl job, and they go off, and that's the end of it. Alex said she has had no drop off in working with brands, and she graduated a year ago because she made that transition. And again, her content wasn't just her sport. She had this other stuff as well.
So it's thinking about those three buckets and getting ahead of the game so you can have that potential transition into the next step of your career. So again, really good advice there. So before we kind of hit the remaining questions from the audience, just I guess a chance to hear from you just about if anyone wants to take this further to kind of research it. We'll obviously share some links, but you're obviously heavily involved, Kristi, with various channels, various publications and media. So if you just tell us some of those things that I know you've got a podcast you've done as well. You've got books out there. So there's a wealth of information that you've made available.
There's a lot of different formats you can get me in. So I own businessofcollegesports.com. That's a lot of news in the NIL space. If you want to see what people are doing and that sort of thing, you would go there. And then that NIL for internationalathletes.com is sort of a microsite on Business of College Sports, so that I didn't have to build a whole new website. But I make it look kind of like its own website where it's got all those international resources. And then I have a Facebook group specifically for parents of athletes at any age, any level. I think I've got a dad in there who has an 8-year-old football player. So we've got from that all the way through college athletes. And I really enjoy doing that. We've got over 1,000 parents in there now, and people are asking questions, and it's questions lots of people in the group have. And so I wanted to move to that format versus just answering questions over email, because I was answering the same stuff over and over. And this way, like, everyone gets to see it. You can ask individual questions. You can ask, really personal, like, hey, we just got this contract. I saw this clause. What does this mean? You can drop that kind of stuff in there. So I can send you the link for that. But it's the NIL playbook for parents, I think is what it's called, but I'll send you the link for it. I've changed the name a couple of times. And then I've got a book out in July called the Athletes NIL Playbook, which is why I changed the name of the Facebook group so that it would match. And it's really meant to be a guide to walk parents and athletes through, how do I get started? What are the different ways I can make money on my NIL? Tons of case studies and examples from athletes in all 3 divisions of NCAA, NAIA, every imaginable sport. Although I don't have anybody rugby, I will admit I did not have anyone rugby in the book. But if you know a great example of one, send them my way, and I'll get something up at least on the website. But I think we covered a lot of the other sports, and I purposely picked people that aren't household names, that don't have enormous followings, because I wanted to show that anyone can do this. NIL really is for everyone who wants to participate in it. And then that book also goes into contract clauses to look out for, questions to ask an agent before you sign with them. It's got a little peek at what revenue sharing, what we think it's going to look like, and what those early contracts that have already gone out have looked like. So I think it's pretty comprehensive if you want to understand this space as a parent or as an athlete.
Great stuff. And that book can be ordered via your website?
It is already up for order, and it has its own website that's just the athletesnilplaybook.com, and it's up on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and everywhere if you want to look for it, and we'll start delivering in July.
Sounds good, and we look forward to ordering our copy very soon and getting our hands on that. So we've covered of the questions that have kind of come in, but we've just got a couple that we'll ask just now. So what impact has the arrival of the transfer portal had on NIL opportunities? I know, again, that's a big topic and one for probably further discussion, but if you can give a snapshot of an answer for that one.
It's a good question. NIL and the transfer portal happening at the same time has made NIL look very different than it would have otherwise. I talked a little bit earlier about sort of inducement and about collectives talking to recruits or to transfers before they actually commit to schools. And that became a whole big court case with the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia. And now collectives are allowed to talk to recruits and to talk to athletes in the transfer portal. And so deals are arranged, generally speaking, before athletes make a choice about where they're going. Now, here's the biggest problem I see is that athletes, we talked a little bit already about why you need a written contract. With recruits, the problem is that promises are made verbally, and then you get to campus and you think these checks are coming and they never show up. That has happened at a lot of different schools. I think some are misunderstandings. I think some really are broken promises. And so you definitely want those things in writing. For transfers, the problem is I have heard multiple cases of collectives, boosters, coaches convincing an athlete in a number of different sports to enter the transfer portal, and then they do not pick up the athlete. And then we get a lot of athletes who don't leave the portal, who give up their roster spot, and in some cases give up their scholarship at a school, enter the transfer portal, either because someone convinced them to do it or just because they thought the grass was greener elsewhere, and then don't get picked up anywhere and have nowhere to play next year. So what I hate about the transfer portal is how many athletes end up in it and don't find a new home, because there's just no guarantee, even if another school has already talked to you about it. So I just think you got to be really careful if you choose to enter the transfer portal. And again, get everything in writing.
Yeah, so two big changes that have come fairly close together in the world of college sport that have a direct impact on each other. And just going back to the international perspective, someone's asked, if an athlete from the UK was to have sponsors from the UK, could they promote that company through images and videos whilst in the US, as long as they don't post until they return to the UK?
So I one of the questions I asked the attorneys in that webinar I mentioned that's over on the International Athlete site, this was sort of the scenario we talked about. And, to be very clear, yes, but so yes, you cannot post it while you're in the United States. And we even got a question in that webinar about, well, what if you hire a social media manager and they're the one who pushes the button? The problem with that, and the problem even with posting it when you're home, that what the women suggested was, if you're going to post it when you're home, stand in front of Big Ben so we know where you are. Like stand in front of something that can prove where you are when you took this picture and when you hit post, because when you're in front of an officer and you're trying to get back into the country, they have the right to look at your social media. It asks for your social media handles on the paperwork you've filled out, and they could pull up your social media, see you endorsing a brand, and you may not in that moment have a way to prove to them where you were when you did that. And once they deny your visa, there's no appeal. And so the immigration attorneys that I did this previous webinar with said that you have just got to be so incredibly careful that it's very clear where you are when you're taking the photo and when you're posting it. It's a little dangerous. So you want to make sure you are taking all the precautions necessary. And I would highly encourage you to listen to the webinar I did with them, because it gets into so much more of the minutia than we were able to get into here.
Absolutely. No, thanks for pointing that out. And hopefully, David, that's answered your question. So final question from me then, and just kind of looking ahead then, where do you see the immediate trends, I guess, in NIL? What do you think's coming next, or what should people who are maybe going to college this fall be looking out for over the next 4 years?
I think, okay, if we take football and men's basketball out of it, for everybody else, I think NIL largely continues to look the same. Football, men's basketball, I think is going to start looking a little bit different because of revenue sharing. So they're going to be getting, I would say, more of their money directly from the university through revenue sharing. And they might see the size and volume of the collective deals go down, because a lot of the people the collectives were fundraising for are now going to be, fundraisers at the university are going to be going after them. So there's going to be some competing for dollars a little bit at some schools between the university and the collective. And obviously they want to all work together. So there's going to be some shifting for football and men's basketball. But I would say for all the other athletes, NIL is largely going to continue to look the same, and I think continue to grow, not just social media where I talked earlier about, that will continue to grow because studies increasingly show that athletes have better engagement, better conversion. So brands want to work with athletes, but I think all the other areas will continue to grow too, because more athletes are learning that these other avenues are possible. Like there's a company I profiled in the book. They work with college athletes to write children's books. Well, most people probably don't know that that company exists, but like they're starting to get more press, and this athlete tells his friend that he did it, and it starts to spider web and grow. So I think we'll see more and more NIL opportunities in a number of different forms for athletes.
Great stuff. I think that's pretty much covered everything we were keen to ask. I'm sure we could probably talk all night. It's a huge topic, something that we're certainly very interested in at First Point USA and learning more. And I think tonight's given us that opportunity to learn a lot more. And we really appreciate the insights and expertise and examples that you've shared with us this evening, Kristi. So very much appreciate that. Hopefully everybody's taken a lot from that. Really, some really good answers, and we'll follow up. I know there's quite a lot of people who were keen on watching this, but it was maybe too late for them. We'll share the recording with them and some of our club partners as well. So hopefully you've all enjoyed it, taken a lot from it. As I say, a huge thanks to Kristi for coming along this evening, for sharing her details and information with us. Hopefully you'll all buy our new book. We're looking forward to getting that out on the 15th of July. So again, really appreciate your time, Kristi. Thank you again, and we will hopefully speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.